Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to ECCHR event series, Human Rights in Times of Crisis, of Resistance and Concrete Utopias. This event was actually planned back in 2019 together with our cooperation partner, the Federal Agency for Civic Education, obviously as an event in presence together with workshops, because even by that time we were aware that we as human rights organizations are facing a multiple and very complex global crisis, climate crisis, crisis of water, of food, growing authoritarianism, which requires a new discussion with new actors, with other actors than the very close human rights community. And obviously, with the current pandemic crisis, it became even clearer that a conversation is needed. We're hoping that at some point in the upcoming months, we will be able to fulfill our function as ECCHR to serve as a platform, as a hub for actors beyond Germany, beyond Europe, beyond law, an interdisciplinary mixed coalition of people. But as Alejandra Ancheta from Mexico said, we have to maintain our internationalist spirit, and so we have to bridge until this time has come. And so this is why we decided to aggregate one more online conference series to the endless series we're having already. Hello everybody, good evening. Good afternoon or good morning wherever you are. So we are live now. We saw a recording from some months ago when we started this series, Human Rights in Times of Crisis. So we're very happy to host now the sixth part of our series. And I have one guest here in the TV studio in Berlin-Lichtenberg, in rainy Berlin. So Magdalena Baransoltis, you came from Vienna. How do you like Berlin today?
I like Berlin very much, so I like it even today.
Okay. No, that's real commitment because it's a really ugly day. So Marta Dillon from Buenos Aires, how are you today?
Fine, it's a pleasure to be here in the way that is possible nowadays. But at least we are in conversation, so thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Marta. So today's next hour is dedicated to the feminist movement, better to say to new feminist movements. On one hand, in Latin America, or at least starting in Latin America, then shifting over to Europe. And on the other hand, and that's Marta's part, and on the other hand, we're talking with Magdalena about newer movements in Europe. So why the feminist movement can impulse the human rights scene, I think we will know better after the next hour, after the talk. But it's very clear that there are two reasons why at least we should dedicate more time and more space to discuss with actors, with scholars from the feminist movement. One is very clear, as we have discussed in the prior events of this series. We're facing a multiple crisis, and this multiple crisis requires an intersectional answer because it's very complex and it's very clear. If we let us being separated, segregated, as this is often the case in the leftist and progressive movement, we're lost anyhow. We don't understand what's going on. And therefore, I'm very happy to talk to two feminist activists who can give us some insight. On one hand, the feminism as an intellectual source to better understand what's going on and also to give better answer. And on the other hand, a very strong movement which is able to mobilize not only many people, but also new people. And so Marta, for example, talked about some People's Kitchen, Ollas Populares in Buenos Aires, where she makes clear that there is one stronghold of the feminist movement in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, are poorer neighborhoods. And Magdalena talks about a referendum, which also tried to mobilize much more people than, let's say, the typical suspect, the usual suspects, who would undersign any petition we would file to them. So I would like to start with Argentina, and Marta, you might imagine that it's a pleasure for me, on one hand, to talk to you. On the other hand, we would like to have you here, or we would also like to have visited you in Argentina, because the Argentinian rights movement is a model for us in Europe, and especially in my own organization, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. On one hand, because it successfully combines very different types of struggle, the legal struggle, which is more or less where we work on, cultural activities, but also political and social activities, and so that's a strength, and that's remarkable, because in Europe often the struggle in the courtroom with legal arguments is seen as a contradiction to political and social struggles, and we can see in Argentina that they can be complemented and connected, and there is no better expression for that than the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, who would say we are all feminists. So many decades struggling to fight for justice for the 30,000 disappeared in Argentina, but learning, seeing themselves in a political process and connecting them to new movements. And someone who connects these two lines, the elder human rights movement and the new feminist movement, is Marta Dillon. So she published a lot. She's writing for Argentinian progressive newspapers. She wrote several books and is also into films. But above all, and the reason why we invited her today, is she's one of the founders from Ni Una Más, now a worldwide leading human rights and women's rights and feminist organization. But she's also part of the Hijos, an organization which organizes the children of the disappeared and assassinated people of the killed and disappeared by the military dictatorship. So Marta, again, very welcome, a very warm welcome. And so maybe you can describe a little bit how you started Ni Una Más in 2015. And what I find particularly striking, that you started, that is Ni Una Más says not one more. You started to challenge the violence, the enormous level of violence committed by state institutions, by state entities in Argentina and later on in Latin America, but also by in private households, on the streets, by men. You were then also involved in the campaign for legalizing the abortion in Argentina, a very successful campaign. But you moreover, let's say, put new life into Rosa Luxemburg concept of the political strike, which is on one hand a method of a tool of mobilization, on the other hand also very thoughtful way to redefine work, to include all kinds of labor in the struggle for better working and living conditions. So we would like to hear a little bit of your insight of the short but very impactful history of Ni Una Más.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say that it's Ni Una Menos. It's kind of the same, but I don't know. Our motto is Ni Una Menos. I know that in in Germany, at least in Berlin or also in Leipzig, there's groups called Keinemer, and I think that Keinemer is more like Neunamas, but it's not the most important thing. I would like to say something about the link or the tie between the human rights movement in Argentina and the feminist movement, because there's a profound link since the beginning, but also when we start Ni Una Menos in 2015, we intentionally look for subscribe or to be part of of the human rights movements, to understand the feminism as a question, as a fact of human rights. I don't know if it is clear, but we think when we start the Ni Una Menos movement, it was in the first place a response to the femicide. Every day in Argentina, a woman is murdered because of her gender. You know, that's we count femicides every day. On 2015, not only the news of one woman and one woman day by day, but also there were becoming a big crisis that we are used to, to economic crisis in Argentina. But what we see it's that intersectional point when the economic crisis make grow the vulnerability of women to get out of cycle violence. So the first thing that we made was a big demonstration on the streets. It was really very big. And this demonstration was a kind of collective mourning of those deaths, because there were not on the, I don't know if, there were not in the public agenda. The women's die or the women's were murdered, and it happens till 2015 that there were not a political issue. They were dying one by one, and that's what we wanted to stop in the first place. But of course, in the condition of our country, and because of the particular characteristics of our feminism, that is a kind of feminist that from, I think, that is not born in the academic saloons, you know. It's a feminism that has its own practice to meet year by year since the 80s, and it's been growing in a fluid dialogue with the grassroots movements, with the picketers that appears in the 2000s, when it was a very big political and economical crisis, and it grows also rounding or meeting in the subpots, you know, because and it can show this intersectional point that we can talk about macho violence or patriarchal violence, but we at the same time we are talking about the economical crisis, the way that capitalism expropriates our potential to work, our work of giving care every day, that it's not there's no salary and it's not even considered as a work. So Yeah, I don't know if I'm being clear, but what I wanted to say is that this kind of feminism, because when I talk with feminists in Europe or in the States, for example, there's all the time this discussion around the liberal feminism or that feminism is not classist enough. But here in Argentina, our experience and the feminist movement that we are building is just it's an intersectional movement that can took the strike tool as took the strike as a feminist tool, just to put on the streets this intersection that we know very well in our bodies, in the territory of our bodies, you know. So we don't have this problem about if feminist is functional to the right wing or not. And we understand very well what happened when we say that feminism is an issue of human rights, because you know, there's two things that happen at the same time. There's something that happen in your own body when you suffer violence, when you are tired of working and not getting paid for caregiving. And it's also that happened to all of us when we meet on the streets. We meet on the streets, and we can experience the racial problems, the class problems, you know, the gender problems at the same time. So the strikes make possible to show it in a very profound and rebellion ways. No, our first motto for the strike was, because the first strike that we did in Argentina was in 2016, and it was an answer to a femicide of an adolescent. And we were so tired, so we said, we go on strike, that's enough. And the motto at this time was, if we are not worthy, then produce without us. So and the question about the strike was, what stops when women strike? No, what stops? Is it possible to stop the caregiving, the household? Is it possible to not care of your children? Well, maybe it is, or maybe this question was put on very different territories, and for example, in the slums, they think, how can we stop when we have to give food for the children, communitary food for the children? Well, maybe we can give raw food and not to cook, no? But that's what we enlightened, that this caregiving, it's also work. So there's the strike also mobilized a question about what is works and what is being paid of being work, and what is not. I don't know, Wolfgang, because I'm in a Zoom and I only see me, and I don't know if you are there and understand what I'm saying. I'm very nervous about my English. Maybe you want to make another specific question.
And it was a good insight, a good first insight. I have actually two, three follow-up questions. One question is, you mentioned your connection to the human rights movement in Argentina, and so it's striking because many of the leaders of the Argentinian human rights movement are women. mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, the grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo, but also many other figures in that movement are women. Why are women so dominant in Argentinian human rights movement? And the second question was in a way related to it, because you described misery with the enormous level of violence, the femicides, the rapes by policemen, the impunity of the femicides, the impunity of violence against women in Argentina. So why did Ni Una Más appear so late, given the fact that there are so many strong women active in Argentinian human rights movement? That was the first part of the question. And the second part, after you started Ni Una Más in Argentina and later on in 2016 you started the strikes, many other countries took this, first in Latin America, but then also in Spain and even in the US and later on in European countries. How would you explain this kind of little success story?
Mm-hmm. Okay, in the first place, there's a long tradition of women leading the causes against injustice and impunity. No? Madres de Plaza de Mayo were the first ones, or at least the ones that can change it all in a way in the last years of the civil military dictatorship on the 70s. But also there are women that are defensors of the territories against the capitalist extractivism, and also women leading in the indigenous population. Yeah, there's a tradition about it. I don't know if there's one explanation about it, but I think that the example that the Madres de Plaza de Mayo gave us, it's very important, because they go out to the household to look for justice for all of us, and they change it all, because they build citizenship for all Argentinians. And the link and the link, I let me one moment. I'm a daughter of the disappeared woman, sorry. And I know, and we reconstruct a lot about the different ways of women resist and the dictatorship, and not only the dictatorship, but the life when they were captive of the dictatorship. And the ways that women resist, or the particular ways of this resistance, it's many times less visible than men that used to fight with guns and also with, their hands. Women resist with laughter. Women resist with making ties with other companions. Women resist in many different ways that achieve to this strength to go out when it is very needed. And I think that's happened with Madres de Plaza de Mayo, and that happens with us as daughters and sons of those women, and it happens also in the feminist movement. We achieve many different ways of resistance, and when we put it together, when we get together, the political imagination can displace many possibilities of actings, of acts, at least. Why Ni Una Menos became so late? I don't know if it's so late or not so late. You know, our country is all the times it's not. It's always in a crisis. Always we have many things to do. You know, yes, it's been 15 years since the 2001 crisis, but well, I think in all those years, the feminist movement was growing year by year, has been growing year by year. But at least I think we have the tools, enough to act on 2015. Because I don't know, because we have many laws that improve improve our livings. For example, equal marriage. For example, a law for gender identity, to recognize trans people. We've been fighting for many things during that year. We've been fighting also, for example, against the impunity of the crimes of the dictatorships, and we achieved that possibility to judge the militaries and their and other people that took part on the genocide during the 70s. All of these things has been happened in these times, you know. We in Hijos, for example, we have to build another tool to fight for impunity, because the human rights movement in Argentina is not only a legal fight. We don't go to the justice with the justice as a big word. We built also a tool that we call scratches, and it was a tool that was another path to justice, and it has to do when we localize genocides living in many neighborhoods with no penalty about about the crimes they committed, and we go there and sign that house and say with them, you know, the things that person done during the dictatorship, and the jail that the jail was their own houses, because, for example, they cannot go to the shops in the neighborhood. I don't know if I am explaining in a good way. I'm sorry, but all those fights were still being done during the first decade of the 2000. You know, the impunities laws fall down, I think, on 2005, and then the many legal procedures began. For example, okay, that's it. That's maybe it's an answer, because we've been fighting in many ways. So when Ni Una Menos became to the streets, I think we have been accumulating in our ways of meeting. The feminism in Argentina meet on particular dates on October every year, and it was suspended by pandemic only. But from 30 years, we've been keep in touch with feminists in all around the country. That's a big country, and we achieved many things, you know, as the laws I described earlier. But at this particular moment, I think, well, it was the time. You know, it was the time, and I think it's not only in our country. Not only in our country that the time has come to to make feminism a rebellious way to confront not only patriarchy, but also capitalist and neoliberalism that has a very specific plan for our bodies and for our work, you know. So the time has come and we were there. And I think that has something to do with that spreads. It spreads like a virus. We use that word virus to a manifesto and for the second international feminist strike. And we feel that it's like this, or like a tide, you know, like a tide, a feminist tide that can affect different bodies with no touching one by one, you know. And this tide, I think we empower each other, like just like seeing the communication, no? The possibilities of the communication are very useful for us, because we get the strength when we see non una di meno in Italia, and in Italia they get strength of our mobilizations, and it spread all over the world, and in Latin America also. So that's it. I think that the same things that are extractivists, well, the same thing that we are worried right now, like the use of the social media, allowed us to connect to many other feminists all around the world. And I think the motto of Ni Una Menos is quite simple, and it's quite simple, but also it's a kind of way of say enough. No, we get our boundaries. We cannot stand anymore. We need to strike. We need to stop those also those discourse about equality that don't fit us, because we are not talking only about being equal to men. We are fighting against a whole system that is based on the expropriation of our potential, our strengths, and our work.
Thank you very much, Marta. I hope, Magdalena, you agree that it was extremely interesting to listen to you, Marta. And the more I feel sorry that you're only remote here, because we could continue for quite a while. But we also want to give Magdalena Baransoltis the stage. She is a literary scholar and works for the Research Center for the History of Transformation at the University of Vienna. She also publishes, amongst other things, this book. You might not be able to read it. It's about the referendum in Austria, and she's going to talk a little bit more, where a number of claims of the women's movement, of the feminist movement, were included in this referendum. And a couple of years ago, and 500,000 of people voted in favor of this. So Magdalena, having heard the Argentinian and Latin American experiences, so how would you describe your own experiences in Europe, and probably at some point also connect them to what we heard from Marta?
Yes, thank you, Wolfgang, for the nice introduction and for the invitation. And also, Marta, thank you a lot for all these interesting insights. I have to say that when I listened to Marta, I thought that it's almost the same in Austria or in Europe. We have somehow maybe a little bit different problems in a different dimension, but you mentioned all the topics which we also think about. And maybe this is the interesting thing will be when I tell about you a little bit more about the referendum, about the Frauenvolksbegehren, the women's rights referendum, which was started in Austria in 2018. It was the second referendum in Austria, women's referendum in Austria actually, because the first one was in 1996. But 20 years later, women came together and said, we had this referendum 20 years ago, and in this 20 years, almost nothing changed, and almost none of those demands became reality. So they started a new referendum again, and it was a non-partisan referendum. It was a crowd-funded referendum, and it was based on the work on volunteers who also were all unpaid and who did a lot of work, from very basic work like putting placards on to very specific work like going to talk shows and speaking in television. And this is something we could maybe also talk about, that activism also is somehow a point of work, and you also need time and space, and you also have to afford this. Anyway, and this referendum had 9 big main demands and like 36 sub-demands, and it was somehow a very complex program, which would we say it was a basis program for a feminist vision of the world and a basis program for dismantling patriarchal ideas and dismantling patriarchal conditions, as well as enabling a better world for all. So we had like this very small demands, which were like worked out from jurists in our team, and how did this happen? Where were these demands coming from? So there was a questionnaire sent to like 15 feminist organizations in Austria, and the question was, when you would have to choose 3 demands which would enable a better world for women or for other disadvantaged groups, which one would you choose? And they responded and gave 3 demands they would choose, and out of all these demands, this 40 approximately demands for the Frauenvolksbegehren for the referendum were chosen. And this was also one of the things which was in public discourse, which was a minor point for the Frauenvolksbegehren, because they all said, this is so complex, there are so many demands, we can handle this. But in the end, you can't like change the world with 1 demand. You need all this program to really change something. And the big thing was that it was very successful. It had 500,000 of signatures. That's a lot in a country where you have 8 million inhabitants. And it's also not that easy to sign this Volksbegehren. You have to go to the town hall, or you have to sign it online, but then you have a super specific card. It's not that you sign it on the street. So 500,000 is really a lot. And then we went to parliament, and then we spoke 3 days about this, about these demands. And in the end, none of these demands became law. But in the end, it was really very successful, because it became a lot of space in public discourse, and also it challenged unquestioned standards about gender relations, and it brought topics to the media which weren't brought this before. Because what were these demands? For example, sharing work, that was a big demand. It meant the 30 hours work week. For example, sharing power meant a quota. Enabling a choice of freedom meant childcare, free, high-quality childcare for every child in Austria until the age of 14. There were more and more demands, and some were very had a very good acceptance in society. For example, the childcare demand, everyone loved it. I spoke to a lot of people on the street. Everyone was, yes, let's do it. It haven't been done. And then another demand, for example, like the 30 hours week, or for example, the abortion on the health insurance cost, that were very problematic also in the public discourse. But what has to be said, that in these 3 years, this referendum was really a feminist hub in Austria. And there were like, I think, hundreds of activists there, and a lot of young people were like politicized, and also a lot of people who haven't been active before started to be active in this referendum, and it got a lot of media presence, and people get to know new concepts, like for example the 30 hours week, and they heard about these new visions. And I think this is very important, to start this narrative and to like start the imagination in which world we could live, and this is a good beginning.
So you mentioned one thing which caught my attention, and so you said in order to really transform this unjust world, you need to be complex. So how did that complexity you just described, how did it work in the mobilization process?
Yeah, it was, I think the big success of the referendum was that it used a very simple language. It was very, it tried to include everyone, and it was very intersectional. And it also worked with a lot of, with everyone also on the pictures. It was intersectional and inclusive, and the language was very simple. For example, we didn't say we want a quota, we said sharing power. That was the slogan, and then we had like the subdemands where we said how we can share power, and we said share work, and then we said how we can share work, and also the hashtag and like the logo for it was eines für alle, one for all, and this meant that this referendum is not only for women, it's also for men, because men will also have have benefits out of it, and it's also for other like stigmatized groups or disadvantaged groups of society. And that was, I think that was a big and a very important issue, that we tried to make this strategy, this communication strategy very inclusive, and that everyone could be part of it and found something for it.
We heard Marta talking about justice and also the kind of different approaches to achieve something like justice. You, in the book you edited together with others, you also have a quote of one of the most important international feminist thinkers on law, Catherine McKinnon, and she says, I quote, "Law has required that women use its rule to be effective, even as part of women's political agenda has been to challenge and change those rules women had no voice in making." So she describes in this quote a little bit the ambivalence of us all to move in a legal forum, and use the existing law, but at the same time question it. So how did that work in your struggle?
Yeah, that's a very ambivalent and a very paradoxical situation, because we have to change a situation which we didn't like create. No, we have to change the law without any precedents and without any praxis. So that was somehow very challenging, because also talking to the parties and talking to the people in parliament, it also showed that, for example, the referendum had its borders for us. Because we went to parliament, we had this 500,000 signatures, and nothing became law, because it's not part. It doesn't have to change. And I think the clue in really changing something and like changing the system from this complexity and from this inequality where women in this system come from, like McKinnon states, is that we have to work all together, like politicians and scholars and also activists, because all of them have different possibilities and different also disadvantages and different borders. And I think this is the clue, and also making transnational connections and fight all together, and don't see failure as something, see failure as something which is part of the game, as you state in your book. I think this is also very important.
Yeah, that's something what definitely connects us, that we all consider us as actors in a political process, and where progress and failure are crucial parts, and this is definitely different to this I would say, Anglo-American thinking of winning and losing, like in a football match.
Can I add something? Because I had like this thought that also in this system, because we came from the system where women were somehow excluded, it's very important to to meaningful narrate something and to make these new utopias, new visions, and to tell the world how a world could look like, because we always think this is the situation how it is and we can change it because we can't imagine it, and this is something we also have to work on, also as human rights workers.
One last question to you, Magdalena, because I mean the referendum happened 4 years ago, and you described it in a way as successful because it's kind of political education, political mobilization process. So what are the next steps you envisage? What's next for you and the others who were the motors of the referendum?
Yeah, so a lot of people who were there, because the referendum was in 2018, then in 2019 we went to parliament, and then we published this book, and this organization still exists, and I'm also part of the board, and it still somehow tried to lobby for these demands. On the other hand, people who were part of this started to make new social movements. Like, for example, there were these Donnerstag demonstrations. This means the Thursday demonstrations against the government, the right government in Austria. And they also started, for example, some of them started an organization which means die junge Linke, the young leftists. And so they go on. Some are in the Fridays for Future and are fighting for climate justice, which is also somehow a feminist goal. So they stayed active and went to different directions.
Let's come back to you, Marta, because I mean, we're all aware that we're facing multiple crises, social inequality in our countries, but also between our continents. A climate crisis, obviously, but the most urgent crisis right now is the pandemic. And you, at some point, we were pointing to the fact that this was also a major obstacle for you as a feminist movement in Argentina. And I mean, I have to say, to relate the situation in Argentina and Latin America to that in Europe, from our point of view, from ECCHR points of view, talking to a lot of our partners worldwide, we have to realize one more time that we are at the same time connected, at the same time we all live from this internationalist spirit, but on the other hand, the privilege of living and acting and working here has, in my lifetime, never been so obvious as during the last 1.5 years. So I'm very sad to hear and to read about the situation in the different Latin American countries, because they all closed their countries quite fast, even faster than the European countries. And in a way, it's also very sad to hear even leftist and progressive people in Europe saying that the crisis, the pandemic crisis, hit us all in the same way because we are all equal, and not at all taking into consideration the different level of the social system and the health system, and also not taking into account the level of responsibility of Western actors, to cut the social systems and the health system in Latin America. So, Marta, what is your assessment on how did the pandemic crisis hit your country, hit the feminist movement, and what are the ways forward right now?
Yeah, I think the boundaries between the global south and the northern global north are rising, and it's hard to know how can we continue living in this kind of globalization where the virus can spread everywhere, but the vaccines are not. So that's a question that we have. Maybe it's not the time, because but it's a question that that remains. Not only the vaccines, but why are we paying for the vaccines? And so questions that so many questions that have to do with the possibility of imagining together a life away from capitalism. No, but well, getting back to your question, for our country, yeah, in a very profound crisis of debt, because the indebtment that the neoliberalism government between 2015 and 2019 in Argentina, it's I can't find the word to describe it, but there's an external debt that put conditions on our daily life, because this enormous debt and the economic crisis that that are the consequence of that indebtedness oblige all of us to get another debt to live, you know, to put food on the table, to send the kids to the school, or you know, just to sustain the day-to-day life, we have to get debts. So this is a kind of obedience systems all the time, and you feel that you work all day, and you never get ready to be free of the debts. And it is happening, and you know, in Chile, for example, the insubordination, the popular insubordination that took off the streets on 2019, set it all the time on the streets and on the walls, you know. In Argentina, if there weren't a feminist movement as strong as it is, I think the crisis could be so much worse. The COVID crisis would be so much worse that we cannot imagine, because we sustain the ollas populares, the support. We sustain also, we react defiant or broken the isolations rules, because we have to go after to take care of the trans people that were living on the street, or to take care to our companions suffering from macho violence, because the isolation measures improves a lot the violence in the homes. And of course, many people lose their work. So, well, those links that we've been building, we have been building on the streets, make a kind of web that allowed us to moderate a little the impact of the COVID crisis and the isolation measures to get you know, to defend us from the virus. And also, and the question that we have now in front is how to reconstruct our ties and our movement that is so tired to sustain the urgency and the crisis. And really, we are tired. We feel it, but you know, it's so important to spot or to enlighten that we need to rebuild not only our feminist movement, but it's become very visible that we need to tie new alliance, transnational alliance that involve the feminist movement, but also the ecological movements, the not liberal ecological movements, of course, but listening better to the migrants and to the indigenous people all around the world that are defending their territories, and consider that I don't want to add nothing to the idea of an apocalypse, but I feel that that the time comes up also to expand the feminist movement and to make more visible the links and the ties with other movements, and to make transnational alliance with those who understand that that no one can be safe if we are not safe at all, if we are not all safe. Yeah, I think that it's a very urgent thing to try to make those alliance, and we have to rebuild our political imagination. I think that's what Magdalena was talking about, utopias, and I think that it's very needed to think again of utopias, because we will need it to rebuild our strength and to react in front of the increasing this increasing financial neoliberalism, and that put many conditions on our lives, and also the arising of those extreme right-wing parties that well, you know them better in Europe, and we are realizing that they are growing, including in Argentina, that we thought it will never happen because we have so many social left social movements, and but in the last elections, well, there were a libertarian party, anti-vaccines and anti-state that collects a lot of votes. So we need to react to those parties, because they are so dangerous for our life, you know. And I think that feminism has the potential to narrate the crisis in an intersectional ways. So it could be a good point to start this alliance, turn our feminist questions about work, about daily life, about what care means, what care of each other means, what kind of utopias we are still fighting for, to connect different movements, class movements, and also ecological movements and migrant movements and anti-racist movements, because it's time.
Thank you, Marta. I take it as an invitation to transnational legal networks like those we are involved in, and you might be happy to hear that there is an ongoing initiative of very different mixture of groups, including Indians, including US-based organization, and Europeans, to file petitions to European legal fora to get better access to vaccine. So that's, and if you like, that invitation goes not only to Marta, but to everybody who's listening and watching us. As part of this series we had in September, a discussion between lawyers and activists on that particular question. right to health and access to vaccines. So if you want to look at it in YouTube. By the way, we have 5 minutes more or less left. So first questions are already dropping in, and I don't want to miss the point also to describe another cooperation, transnational cooperation between the Argentine-based human rights organization CELS and our European Center. So we work on pesticides and on violations of the agricultural industry. And that is a South American cooperation, which was, by the way, hindered by Corona because we couldn't continue to converse. Zoom is fine for a certain kind of conversation, but if it comes to such a work, it's incredibly difficult to communicate. So the first question, I would put it to you and maybe then also to Marta. We'll see, we have a couple of minutes left. The first question would go to you, Magdalena. What needs to happen for the social transformation to fully take place? Where should feminist movement put more energy into next?
Okay.
Complex question for a person who's used to complex questions.
I would love to know the answer for this question, because then I would realize it. I think it's not that easy, because in the feminist movements you always have to work on little small construction sites all the time, but on the other hand you have to envision these big utopias. And I think what, from my perspective, is most important, and it's also connected to the things Marta said before, that we have to know and to think that everything is connected in times of globalization, in times of neoliberalism, in times of post-democracy. We need to think very global, and we have to think very transnational, and we have to work on this little construction site and work on these utopias and do it together in solidarity. And we have to focus on our, not on our differences, but on the things we have together and we fight for. This is also a very important thing what you said, that some in the liberal and in the leftist, there are big sometimes fights, and I think we should concentrate on the common things. And there are also like the supply chain law, which is incoming, which are connecting all these different demands from different movements, and I think these are important things we should focus on.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Marta mentioned the Chilean, very successful Chilean movement, the Chilean leftists, despite the pandemic crisis. So Marta, the question to you as well, but maybe with an additional question. So what needs to happen for the political transformation, and what needs also to happen to connect the human rights, the transnational human rights movement to the transnational feminist movement? Because what you had successfully exercised, what you are successfully exercising in Argentina is unfortunately not so much happening on a transnational level.
I think, let me think how how can I say it? But I think this in Argentina the human rights movement make a big transition or a process of growing along the years, where we start in a point that we ask for memory and for justice for our victims, and we have to show us to the world and also in our country as victims, no? And that happened also maybe with the feminism that at least at the 80s or 90s, including the early 2000s, many images associated to feminism put the victims in the first place. And I think what we have done in Argentina is to take a step out of the place of the victim and to build agency and fight since from another being a political subject. And this is also for the human rights movement and for the feminist movement. I don't know if it is clear, but I think that there's something there, that we are not asking only for justice. We need to build another justice, and we need to fight not only the laws or not only the totalitarian governments, but to realize that it's the system what is in crisis, and the system, the capitalistic system, it's based on the violation of the human rights, and it's based on the exploitation of women, and it's not a problem of recognizing or it's a problem of the whole structure. So I think that when we understand that, we can it will be easier to connect feminism and human rights movements and ecological movements, that we are all in the same in the same place to fight for all of us.
Much, Marta. Yes, the human rights movement has to connect to the transnational feminist movement, the ecological movement, but we also have to think of how to decolonize this world, and that will be a topic for our next event on November 17th. And the title is Postcolonial Injustice, Genocide in Namibia and Black Lives Matter. So we are inviting 2 activists and lawyers from Namibia, and we will talk with them about their claims for reparation against Germany because of the genocide, the historical genocide 1904 to 1906. And we are also talking to 2 lawyers from the US who are close to the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's very clear after this conversation, dear Marta and Magdalena, that we have to continue the conversation, and I really hope that we can all come together at one place, not so far away, and discuss how to together organize a political transformation to overcome this absolutely unbearable state of injustice in the world. So, adios Marta, nos vemos, and we have the pleasure now with Magdalena to stay at least in Berlin and continue here a little bit more. So hopefully see you soon, and have a nice evening, day.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.